Now down to 10.0, which is the superintendent's report, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Little and board. This is for information only.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Obviously, we have a lot taking place. I did want to, I'm going to talk about two things sort of during my section, and then we'll roll out the other specific reports. The first thing I want to tell you is that today is the second day of Leap Day, and we are with 3 more days to go. These are the days that our state superintendent lobbied the state legislature for, and our children are coming in small groups. They are, the teachers are using assessments, teachers are building relationships, teachers are touring them around school. It's been my pleasure over the last couple of days to see 12 schools in 2 days. It's been a bit of a whirlwind over the last couple of mornings, but what a wonderful chance to get back and really for the first time since March have students in our school with the purpose of instruction. And so it is an exciting time for that. The plans that you start seeing in place have really been great. Some good feedback from teachers as we walked around. The feedback, they actually like the extra 5 days. Been a lot of good feedback on those extra 5 days and about maybe we can do that even beyond COVID because they get a chance to do some different things that they don't really get a chance to do. One teacher pulled me aside today and said when she was delivering the KRA, it was enabled to do so. You didn't already have a full class of kids and you were really rushed to sort of try to gather the data and get it moving. You really could take your time and get to know the students better. So a lot of great things taking place during our Leap Days, and we'll continue to that over the next 3 days, but lots of action taking place. I also wanted to, I called Dr. Phillips because I wanted him to share some of my time today because there's an important question, and I will tell you, the idea is not completely formulated yet, but I wanted to make sure today that we talked about, especially as with on August 31st, the horizon of the first day of I don't want to call it real school because what's happening now is real school, but the first day of our official school calendar, where how do we begin to proceed? One of the great questions that we are going to have to tackle, and it may help, DHEC may eventually give us some different guidance on this, and of course, we will be working with DHEC anytime we have conversations about the coronavirus and COVID-19 and our medical professionals. But a critical point, a critical question is when do we begin to shift the educational model based upon the data? You saw already my beloved University of North Carolina, I think, made it a week before they ended up shifting to a virtual model. Likewise, we're going to have to ask ourselves the question, how does the data drive our decisions in relation to the coronavirus? So we're going to give you just a brief 30,000-foot view of how we are framing that decision. And I believe Dr. Phillips is going to share with us a couple of things about that.
Is fluid and evolving. And as a result of that fluidity, we need to have a protocol for monitoring and acting on the level of spread of COVID-19 within our district. So, and it's important that we are transparent about it and that it is structured in such a way that our schools have the guidance that they need to make these kinds of decisions. So, what we've come up with at this point are 4 primary decision factors. Okay, so the first being the number of active cases in the school. So that's all human beings in the school, not just students. So how many people do we have with active cases? What is our student attendance rate? And we're looking at in the moment and over time. So are those trends going up or down? Same thing with staff attendance. Or do we have enough people in the building to teach the children? And then finally, if we have staff out, do we have the capability to cover those classes, at least for a short period of time, a matter of 2 or 3 days, consistently? So we're looking at the availability of that auxiliary staff, because we recognize that substitutes may be in short supply this year. So schools have sort of tapped certain staff members to help cover these classes in the event that there are teachers out that do not have substitutes. So these are kind of the four things we're looking at to determine whether or not we need to make some sort of shift. Now, this is the part that's still in development somewhat. So for each factor, we'd like to develop some sort of critical value that leads us to take some action. And that action would, in almost every case, begin with an investigation into the circumstances. Okay, no single factor, unless extremely, extreme, would lead us to an immediate shift. But we would look at the circumstances surrounding that factor and determine if action needed to be taken. So these data would be monitored daily. We would check the plan is to develop a dashboard. We have a prototype of it that would allow us to look by school and determine if there are any of those four factors that are flagged as a concern. And then we would look at the daily levels and the trends over time. Then we would investigate if any of those did show up as a concern, and if needed, we would act. So we've developed this sort of draft of a matrix to make these kinds of decisions on. So as you can see, in any of these cases where one issue was flagged, there's only one that may result in immediate shift in instructional model. And when I'm talking about shifts, understand that I'm saying you move from one model to the next. So if we're at 5 days face-to-face and something happens that needs a shift, we would move to another model, either hybrid or virtual. And so once you start looking at these combinations of things, then things get a little more difficult to do within a school. So for example, if your staff attendance is of concern and your availability of auxiliary staff is of a concern, then you don't have enough people in the building to teach the students, then you may need to be making a decision about what to do. And then obviously the more factors that show up, the more critical things could potentially be. Now, obviously, it's important to set the benchmarks that we use to make these decisions very carefully. And that's why those are still in development. My kids would tell you that I'm a doctor, but I'm not the smart kind. So I don't pretend to know, the best way to set these benchmarks. So we're trying to do our due diligence and find the best way to measure these factors in order to determine at what level we need to make a call on that.
And I would add, I think everyone's struggling with that. And so I think, looking at rolling 7, 14, or even 28-day averages and how they're trending, and again, getting 1 or 2 standard deviations out on that trending line may inform us, because I don't think anyone knows what to expect. And again, if we use state level numbers as percentages, they're really designed for hundreds of thousands of people. And I've learned in the work of the hospital, when you're dealing with a smaller denominator, which some our elementary schools are, 1 or 2 kids can switch a percentage dramatically, right. And you'd hate to make a decision based upon a percentage because 2 kids flipped over, one way or the other. So that's where it gets a little bit difficult generalizing state level DHEC numbers to our individual school or classroom decisions. So.
Right, that's correct. Yes, sir. So again, that was a very high level view of this, and I'm happy to answer any questions to the extent that I am able. So be careful what you ask for.
Well, and Dr. Phillips, and I have a question, and I don't actually think that it's a question for you.
Okay.
Although your scenario that you gave is what led to the question. So maybe it's a Dr. Little or a Dr. Talley question. So in the instance that Dr. Phillips illustrated on the graph, so we're at the line where we're at the critical level of staff attendance and the critical level of auxiliary staff availability, which means, okay, we've got to switch to hybrid. In that situation, who is actually teaching the students? Because the teachers, I'm assuming, are in some sort of a quarantine mode, and the staff is in some sort of either lack of availability or quarantine mode. So then who provides the instruction at that point in time for when the students do go hybrid?
Well,
I think you're making an assumption that that's what the investigation we would really look at. What are the status of the teachers? And why do you have a particular student percentage? So for example, you might be in a situation where we have a really nasty case of the flu, and that all those things are going to be short-term, and those are going to turn around pretty quickly. The flu or strep throat or stomach bug, which we have on a fairly regular basis. So that's why the investigation is going to be so important, and you begin to identify the individual factors of the situation. So is it isolated? Is it?
Right, but I'm kind of down past investigation to more where it looks like the investigation triggers an action. So when you trigger the action, have we anticipated what we're going to do if we have no available teachers and no available auxiliary staff? And that question has been placed to me by teachers and parents is, if teachers are quarantined and they're not supposed to teach from home, and the students go out on virtual, then who picks up the instruction for those teachers in their absence when the students are either in the classroom or hybrid?
Well, so let me kind of give you from the beginning. So when a teacher is quarantined and they are asymptomatic, and that's really the key piece here, in order for them not to lose leave, we are having them work from home during those situations. And so I know Dr. Talley and her team and Howard's out here too, so I don't want to be the only one answering this question, but I'll have them jump in. But there's the element where we want the teachers to teach from home in that circumstance if they're able to. Now, if they're sick, we're not having them teach from home, and then we will figure out other means to get the instruction to the students.
Right. I would just add to what Dr. Little has said. It depends. So just because you're quarantined doesn't necessarily mean you're sick, right? So it would depend. But honestly, to answer your question, if everybody's sick, well, there's no one. We don't have a storage room of teachers to pull from, to answer your question. We hope that would not happen, but it would really depend.
And I understand, and that's a valid statement. But you can see, like, especially if there's spread within a high school, that, all of a sudden the auxiliary staff is all...
Ms. Green, can you adjust your microphone? It's kind of
Sorry.
hard to hear you.
I turned it off, sorry. You could see where, and heaven forbid any of this happens. This is all wild speculation, and things are going to go smoothly, and we're not going to have to do any of this. That's my prayer. But in the event that we're in a situation where there's spread among staff, and so we start having staff members fall like dominoes, either symptomatic or asymptomatic, or just they have to quarantine because we don't know yet. And so then the auxiliary staff, there is a limited amount of auxiliary staff in each school or even district-wide, and they're all of a sudden maxed out. So I guess there is a concern that you've got students who are not exposed and are not quarantined, and where are the teachers to provide the instruction that needs to take place? And I don't know if that's just...
Well, okay, so we've talked about those types of scenarios. So the scenario, first of all, is, again, if the investigation leads us to say we are unable to deliver face-to-face instruction, the most likely scenario, based on what you've asked, and again, this is hypothetical, so there's always a lot of different variations to this. So to Dr. Talley's point, it depends. I want to lean on it depends. And I'm cautious about doing all hypothetical scenarios tonight because because there's a bazillion of them. But I would tell you, and if we don't have the faculty, then our first response is most likely to switch to a more virtual approach for a certain amount of time as those faculty are able to cycle back in. But that's also part of the investigation because you got to see where are people on the cycle of when they're coming back in. So for example, if you have a large number of teachers who are quarantined, but they're getting ready to come back in, say within 3 days, your response might be a little different than say, if you have all of a sudden a large number of staff quarantined and then they're not going to be back for 3 weeks. That's a different approach. I would also tell you it's one of the huge reasons why we are, and I don't mean just to talk to you there with a question, it's one of the huge reasons why we are practicing our safety protocols so that we don't find ourselves in those situations. That's what the mask, that's what the 6 feet, that's what the washing of hands, all of those things together that we're really trying to work on. Now, as we reduce social distancing, then we are really then relying on the other protocols, and we got to be really good at it. So when people ask me, well, why aren't we going back to school face-to-face 5 days a week on August 31st? That's my response. We are practicing. We got to get really good at it. Today's a great example. These last 2 days have been great examples where we've started the practicing. Kids are coming in with masks for the first time. They're getting used to being in a classroom wearing a mask. Teachers are getting used to being in classrooms wearing a mask. Teachers are getting used to, and really all staff are getting used to, how do we sit beside each other? How do we collaborate? How do we work together? And so when you become close contacts, those are the types of things that we're practicing in that regard so that we are able to avoid mass, and I say avoid to the extent possible, avoid mass quarantining of those types of situations for our staff. But that's a critical example of why we got to practice, because there is a world where high levels of teachers are unable to teach. Now, the other thing is that's also probably going to be related to community spread. And so it's highly unlikely, I think, to have all teachers and no kids. It's probably going to be a combination of those things. And that's why we're trying to trigger those decision points. We understand the investigative process. We understand the framework. Now what we have to do is attach those numbers, and we will have that prior to us starting school. That's the commitment that we're having to everybody, because we've got some really good plans in place. We have some ideas that are pretty strong ideas, but we just need to tweak those last data points.
Well, and I don't mean to monopolize the time, but one more question. So the investigation, Dr. Phillips, I'm going to give this back to you.
Okay.
Is that going to happen at the school level, or is that going to be, there's going to be a task force that does that district-wide?
So I think it would be some combination of that. You know, a principal obviously would be sort of the front line of that. They know what's happening in their school. But then I can see them consulting with district personnel, with DHEC, with nursing staff, with doctors, whoever is available to talk about these things and conduct those investigations. One thing I did fail to mention is that the shift would not necessarily be for an entire school, right? So if you're within your course of your investigation, you saw that it was cohort A at a high school or the first grade hall at an elementary school, you may take action on just that segment, if that's what's recommended. So,
yes, I want to piggyback on that very quickly. So, the litmus test is we want to make the decision that impacts the closest possible position to the issue. So that might mean we're going to start. Can we do classrooms? Can we do grade levels or wings? Can we do schools? Can we do attendance areas? And then finally, can you do the district? But we're going to, our first choices, because like, for example, if you have an issue at Meadow Glen Elementary School, there's no need for Centerville Elementary School to shift to a virtual model necessarily. It may just be an issue in the River Bluff High School attendance zone, or there might be an issue in the Gilbert attendance zone that there's no need then to switch up the Pelion attendance zone. So those are the types of things that we're looking at and really trying to dig down into that. But I want to go back, if you'll go back one slide, so just as a reminder though, we've got a dashboard that we're creating that is feeding us that data, and we will be reviewing that data every single day and to begin to try to track it. Again, remember, one of the things, we're going to be agile, flexible, and nimble, and really begin to adapt. So we're going to be feeding that dashboard. That dashboard is going to be updating every day, and we're going to try to really be on top of that. We're not going to examine the data every 2 weeks. We're examining the data every day.
After probably a couple 100,000 patient encounters, I can tell you a virus does what a virus wants to do. It is a brush fire waiting to become a wildfire. And essentially that's what COVID is. COVID is now a wildfire. And so all we can do is hope to contain it, to put in mitigation strategies to tackle it and deal with it. And fortunately, we do have, some guidelines. And, the biggest guideline we have right now that is leading to a lot of these major school shutdowns that you are seeing is when you fall outside of the social distance parameters. And so now we're getting really into the weeds and talking about distance and numbers. And so we're talking more than 15 minutes for less than 6 feet. Mask is regardless. That's probably the biggest misnomer that's out there. DHEC gives no guidance whether you wear a mask or don't wear a mask. If you're masked, you're less than 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, you are considered, quote unquote, a close contact to any COVID positive patient. So our real rub doesn't come on August 31, because now that we're a little bit further down the road, we know that virtually 25% of our patient population roughly, and let's speak in generalities across the district, we won't pocket them off into elementary, middle, but we know that 75% of our students will be coming into the school, albeit now we're down to 37.5% where we've got cohort A and cohort B. Based off of that 37.5%, we can guarantee social distancing guidelines, correct? Within the pretty close within the school, within the actual classroom. Do we know what that number is to where it falls apart and we can no longer guarantee the social distance? Therefore, that opens us up for the potential of a larger quarantine, because in this scenario,
Sure.
if a student tests positive in a classroom, if they're socially distanced, there is no mass quarantine that will occur. That student will be in isolation because they're now COVID positive, but there is no mass quarantine that occurs as a result of that. However, once we fall below that 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, which obviously every class is, then that's when the real possibility opens up. So do we have an idea of what that number is? Is it 50%, 60% capacity? What capacity of our schools to where we say we can no longer guarantee a close contact distance?
Well, when we go back to school 5 days a week, that's the moment that we can no longer guarantee social distancing. So when, the feedback, again, we've gotten lots of feedback from people who say we need to be 5 days a week. Some people say we need to be 100% virtual. Some people say, hey, the hybrid model is a good idea. So to your point, in the hybrid model, we really only have 3 options in that, right? So, but in the hybrid model, we are pretty confident and that we're going to make it happen with limited quarantines. But we can project out to see what it could possibly have been
Correct.
In a situation. The other thing that we're doing is we're working with a lot of plans internally to make sure transitions, to make sure we have seating charts, all of these different safety features are in place. But on September 28th, when we lose social distancing, that's going to be the critical feature. And again, I keep saying this. I don't know that I'm actually answering your question because we're only going to do one of 3 models at this point. So it's when we come back 5 days face-to-face, that's the model, that's the moment where larger scale quarantine comes into play.
But we know that number is at 75%, we can't guarantee social distance.
Correct. Well, because keep in mind, it's 75% across the school.
Correct.
But our class sizes are still basically the same based upon, because we only have so many teachers. Does that make
Right.
sense? So we
Okay,
have,
okay,
so you
gotcha.
still, if last year you had 20 kids in an Algebra 1 class, you're still going to have 20 kids in that same Algebra 1 class this year.
Right.
It's just your overall number of people at the school is going to be reduced.
Right.
Right, but you still
So it's a
have
redistribution
the same
at the end of
class
the day.
sizes will still be the same. So from that end, we are going to have, it will be greater risk to be larger scale quarantined. But again, I keep coming back to this, but that's where I saw something great today. So I saw a group of eighth grade boys walk out of a classroom, and you saw them all doing this right here. Because we have hand sanitizer in every classroom, and they're scrubbing in and scrubbing out. And they're starting to practice these safety protocols. And as we continue to talk about keeping each other safe and doing all that work, I'm confident that we'll be able to reduce some of the impact of what we're seeing. Now, what happens outside in the community, we won't have that control over. But what we have control over, I think we're already seeing, even in this early stage, some good examples of the safety protocols that we're going to need to keep each other safe. So it's the moment we come back, and that's the critical piece. Once we get rid of that social distance on September 28th, we are going to be at risk for larger scale quarantines. Now, what we're trying to figure out, though, and again, we're trying to nail this number, once your student attendance gets below X number percent, is it time for you to shift into an instructional model so you can maintain stability?
Sure.
One of the things we want to be really careful of, and now I'm kind of off on my thing, so I apologize, but this is an issue, though. One of the things we want to be careful of is we want to be careful that we are moving students from a quarantine environment to a face-to-face environment, quarantine environment to a face-to-face environment. So that's why we want to make sure once we shift to either, if we need to shift to a hybrid, stay hybrid, shift to hybrid, or shift to virtual, that we could guarantee a stable instructional model for those kids. Because you don't want, I have a rising senior, you don't want her to have 2 weeks quarantined, 2 weeks back at school, 2 weeks quarantined, 2 weeks back at school. That's going to be incredibly challenging.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that's part of that data monitoring. And if we can't guarantee a stable learning environment, then we have to stabilize the learning environment. And as to your point, the hybrid model and the virtual model is a more stable learning environment when it comes to quarantining.
Okay, so I have a follow-up on that. Kyle asked, we can guarantee social distancing guidelines, right? And you answered pretty close. And this was one of my questions as well, and I'm just going to use Gilbert Middle as an example. We have larger class sizes than most schools and districts, but we have smaller classrooms. So how are those numbers being taken into effect for social distancing? Because obviously the desk may not be 6 feet apart.
We feel like we're going to be pretty close to that number across the board. Again, I can't tell you exactly it'll be 5 feet 12 inches or 5 feet 11 inches or whatever it looks like, but each school has that. And so I'd have to ask the principal of that school if there's a Gilbert Middle School or whatever else. But I'm going to turn that over to Jeff, either Jeff Salters, who's actually been in charge of that.
Yeah.
But I feel like we're pretty close to guaranteeing that across the board.
Yeah, we've gone around to every school and basically laid out each classroom, and we've, adjusted the furniture in each classroom to achieve that 6 foot distance. And some classrooms have smaller capacities than others. It just depends on the size of the room, but we've adjusted for that in each space.
So what happens when a class has more students than there are desk space 6 feet apart?
So the social distancing that we're talking about is really in the initial phase of the return, and that's the AABB. And then once we get, hopefully move back 5 days face-to-face, that's when everybody's going to be back. And as Dr. Little has already said, you won't have the 6 foot social distance at that point. You're going to have a classroom of, 20, 25 kids.
And ultimately, you're going to hope that your mitigation strategies squelch any possibility of widespread disease, if you will. So you hope that the face mask, you hope that the hand washing, you hope that the grab-and-go lunches, you hope that all of these things, all of these various mitigation strategies you see are enough to suppress any, and quite frankly, we've seen it in the state. I mean, look at the numbers here recently. I mean, just with the face mask, the wider face mask use that you've seen in the state of South Carolina, you've seen those numbers come down, all up to the point at which we get a vaccine.
I'm just hearing that we're not 6 feet apart. Like, I don't think we're being guaranteed at the end of the day that we are mitigating all of those factors, because we can't guarantee that all of those desks are 6 feet apart.
Yeah,
That's what I'm hearing.
I think you're obviously going to have physical constraints that you have to deal with, and I mean, there's only so many seats we can put in here, but,
Right.
you know, and truth be told, it is probably the best way to think about it is an arm length, you know. I'm one arm length, you're one arm length, our fingers touch, and we're sufficiently separated, you know, and some studies have even shown 3 feet to be sufficient in suppressing spread. You know, they consider that more of a physical distance than a social distance, I think is the terminology they may use. But DHEC has not adopted that as their standard, nor do I think they will, unless you've seen anything different, Brent.
No, I guess the main point, though, is are we doing everything we can to distance students and teachers? And I think the answer is yes.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise, we need portables and new buildings, and that means leveraging taxes. I mean, that money's got to come from somewhere. So I think it's our due diligence is to spread out the students and the teachers to the best of the space we have. And again, I think the mask is really, to Dr. Guyton's point, is really making the difference. Because again, if a kid has the virus or a teacher and they're wearing their mask, it's a whole lot harder to spread the virus because it's being trapped in the mask. That's the key to this.
Okay.
And remind us again, the numbers that are, as of today, that are in the virtual program,
Right at 7,000.
7,000? Okay.
So
And I
we're
think
almost
too,
27%, I think is our number, right? 26.9 or something.
Yeah.
and I think Dr. Little's made the point, I mean, we're only as strong as what our families do at home. So we can do all of this in our own buildings, but we really need for our families and the community to pull together, and it's a team effort. Everybody's got to help, so. And I agree with Dr. Guyton, wearing the mask, I think, has been really good.
Do we know how many students have withdrawn to attend another platform of school? Do we have those numbers yet, or?
We don't have those numbers yet. We won't have those. Remember that attendance over the first little
Right.
bit is always this moving target. We'll know more about that over the next few weeks, maybe the next couple months. All right, so thank you, Dr. Phillips, for that brief update. We will, again, our to-do list is to make sure we land on those areas prior to August 31st, and I think we'll be able to get there. So operations, we're going to finally not put operations at the end of the evening. So Mr. Salters.
Thank you, Dr. Little. And we're going to continue a little bit of the conversation about school readiness. Here we go, Josh. Thank you. And so I just want to highlight a few things that are going on at the schools that you'll see as you're out and about, and our parents will begin to see. You'll see a lot of signage going up around the district. We are excited about, actually, much of the signage that you see is actually being printed out of White Knoll High School. We have our printing business out there. The instructor reached out to me early on in our process and offered the services of his class and also the equipment, and so it's really been a win-win. We are saving tremendous amounts of money because, as you can imagine, most companies are really trying to seize the opportunity. So you'll see a lot of different signs posted around our buildings, traffic directions. This is on floor, and we're trying to get students to walk certain ways through the buildings, up certain, even in this building, we have 2 stairwells that go down, 1 stairwell that goes up, and so we're dedicating things like that. And you'll see these signs on the floor to help direct movement for students. It's really hard to see in this picture, but which I guess is a good thing because they're so clear. But we actually have plexiglass shields here, and then there's a little pass-through right here, and there's one on this side as well. This is actually Beechwood Middle School where these pictures were taken. We have disposable masks available for folks who come in and they're not properly masked. We've gone into each restroom and designated limits for the number of occupants in the restrooms, and these signs are posted for those purposes. We've bagged all of the water fountains. We do have a bottle filler or bottle fillers that are being installed in each of our schools. We're trying to limit the amount of interaction with the bubblers that you see here. You see the hand sanitizer station right there. In many cases, you do have to touch this button to fill your bottle, but that's, we put the hand sanitizer right there. And some of the newest bottle fillers are sensor-based, and so you just put the bottle underneath it. You'll see hand sanitizer dispensers all over the district. And so additionally, I've got a couple other things here. Of course, we talked about the plexiglass last week. We were providing a spray bottle. It looks like this Sanitize spray. This is a food-safe spray. These will be available to every teacher in the district. Those are distributed to each classroom. We're not asking every teacher to clean every desk between every interaction with students, but we know there are going to be times when teachers need access to some additional disinfectant, and so we've provided that. You'll see a lot of these hand sanitizer bottles around kind of as a backup, and so we're providing those to all of our teachers. And then we have masks that we have purchased. I've got kind of one of each flavor. We kind of did some generic colors, really kind of trending towards more of the high school colors, but we have different sizes. These are going to be provided to all of our students, and so even at our smallest elementary students, we'll be able to use masks. We're looking into these lanyards now. We feel like during mass breaks, while students are eating, it's obviously not good for this mask to be turned over and laid on a desk and then turn around and put right back in your face. So we feel like these lanyards will allow them to, we're hanging around their neck and better protect it. So we're really, we're trying to, identify things that mitigation strategies, as you mentioned earlier, to do what we can to provide a safe environment for students. So those are just a few of the things that are going on, and each school is in the process of rolling those strategies out. We've seen some good results from our staff and the students who have been back with the LEAP program this past or this week. So haven't really seen any students having issues with masks and that kind of thing. So they're doing a really good job. Really proud of what we're seeing. I want to take you through a few pictures very quickly. We did occupy a couple of the wings of Centerville Elementary School. So we have the main office, and then we have the B wing and the D wing back here. And ironically, this is the A wing, so we have the bad section of the building. But just keeping you awake. And so E and C will be coming. We have another inspection next week, but we were able to bring staff and students in, parent drop students off, and they were able to move about through these two areas of the building. Buses came in the bus loop and dropped off, and students entered down in this wing and walked to their appropriate classroom for testing. So, and we were able to deliver food to the facility from Gilbert Elementary School. So we will have full occupancy by the 31st, but we were able to get students in to do the testing, so that was a big push, and we're pleased to make that time frame. We'll start moving all of the teacher equipment in and supplies next week, and do that throughout the course of the week to be ready for the 31st. Just a quick shot of an interior hallway there. You can see the classroom wing and the terrazzo floor that's been finished there. Here's the center commons area. Obviously, it doesn't look like that now with the workers in there, but and still waiting on some wood laminate to cover some of these sheetrock spaces and all. So still work to be done, but they are in and excited about being in the space. had a lot of very positive comments about the facility and obviously the difference in the space. This kitchen area just recently went through the DHEC inspection there, so it's just about ready to serve food. New Pelion Middle School coming along very nicely. We really are close. There's a separation wall here, and we could really have occupancy of this building here real soon. We're waiting on Joint Municipal Water and Sewer to tie in their portion of sewer to the building, and so it'll probably be later this fall before we are able to move in. But really good progress that's been made on this building. The classroom wings, this is actually the fire access road that loops around. And remember, this is the prototype of Beechwood, so you see some similarities there for sure. Kind of looking in on the second floor into the library there, the main commons area. And interior shot of the library. Cafeteria, the terrazzo floors have been polished. They're working on some lights there. And the kitchen equipment is there and installed and pretty much ready to go as well. Gymnasium, the air conditioning is on in the gym now, so the floor is in and being acclimated, and they'll actually lay that floor here soon, as soon as the wood acclimates to the wonderful humidity that we're having. Pelion High School athletic improvements, just about finished up. Looks really great. We added the weight room off the back here. These are roll-up doors so students can come outside and do some drills outside. Here's a kind of a closer shot of that area. There's circulation hallway, and then to the right is the wrestling facility. This is the wrestling room, painted and ready for mats and pads on the walls. And this is the weight room. Just got a few weights in. They're still waiting on the shipment of those racks and so forth, but there'll be some turf that'll be in the middle here, and then the weight racks will be around the room. So it's going to be a pretty cool setup for those students. Gilbert Elementary School, which I guess we can take the current Gilbert Primary off now that it's officially back open. Made some significant driveway improvements. We're still in the process of finalizing some of those to get this stuff topped out, but we added a lot of stacking, added some new handicap parking, and restriping of some areas there. This is the new entrance area, so we now have 2 lanes in and 2 lanes out. Good improvement there. They got a new kitchen hood there as well, and that work has been completed. One of the things Mr. Moody is most proud of is the paint. The hallways were all painted similar colors with some nice accents, and it was a good bit different colors there before. I'll just say he did a good job working through that, so it looks a lot better. The new Lexington Middle School site, progressing very nicely. This is the upper end of the site, Old Cherokee Road up here. You can see this is eventually going to be the service drive for buses and deliveries, and the 2 arch culverts that are spanning the wetlands are in place. And this will ultimately be the parent drop-off drive, and there's a temporary bridge here that will be, once these are finished, traffic will shift to this side, and they'll put this permanent bridge in. Another area, if you look closely, you can see the classroom wing layout. These are all the footings that have been poured. Underground storm detention going in over here. They've completed underground storm detention back here. And they actually poured this classroom slab today or in the middle of the night. And so making really good progress despite the weather and that they've had there. A lot of rain. This site's very much like Beechwood, so when the rain comes, it gets really soupy and nasty. So closer shot of the underground storm detention. And there's the 2 bridges that will ultimately, these are like the ones we used at River Bluff, and there'll be a road that runs over the top of those. Closer shot of the retaining wall there. Lexington Elementary, a lot of work is going on at the elementary school with improving traffic flow and drives, and you can see they're very involved in that work. Some of this work will not be done at the time that school starts. We're waiting to tie into some of the work that the town is doing, so there will be some kind of messy looking stuff when you ride by, and you may say, whoa, wait, are they ready to open? But we will have, in fact, we've had some OSF inspections and assured occupancy there. New canopy on the back of the school there. It's going in, storage building. It's funny that schools get most excited about the little things, the canopies in the storage buildings, two of their favorite things. So that's really useful. Technology center, not real exciting photos, but reworking some bathrooms that were built in the 70s, making those ADA compliant and improving those. New roll-up door in one of the shop areas there, and new floor covering there. Oak Grove Elementary School, not a lot of pictures here, but just this one main one of the classroom addition. You can see it's really come out of the ground. Encourage you to ride by there if you have an opportunity. It's off the end of the left side of the building, and they're starting to brick it up, so it's really coming along very well. We'll likely have a roof over it in the next month or two, so doing really well there. Red Bank Elementary School, the office got a facelift, new carpet, new counter, circulation counter, and the carpet there. So a new fresh look for the folks there, and a new kitchen hood in that area. New toilet partitions, freshening up the restroom facility for them. White Knoll Elementary School, actually have a classroom addition going on there. You can see they've poured the slab for that, so good progress at White Knoll Elementary School. This is a kindergarten classroom addition right off the front right side of the building. And the ever exciting fire alarm upgrades that they're getting. White Knoll High School, remember 32 classroom addition and Performing Arts Center. This is the foundation block for the 32 classroom addition. They'll be pouring some slab here pretty soon, making some really good progress over here at White Knoll High School. And this is the backside of the current little theater, and you see where the wall was torn out, and this will actually is where the beginnings of the new Performing Arts Theater will start. So, and White Knoll Middle School, new bleachers. Very excited about those. They had the old wooden bleachers that didn't have the proper hand railing and so forth, and were really under disrepair. The biggest thing they were concerned about is preserving their Warhawk, and so the bleachers blend nicely with the Warhawk and worked out really well. They do have some new tile. We retiled the cafeteria. It goes very well. They got some furniture a while back, and so that looks really, really good in there. And new carpet. The hallway, second floor hallway, needed new carpet. We did HVAC replacement there. This was a project as part of I mentioned earlier, the $393 million that was called out originally. HVAC replacement at White Knoll High School was one, White Knoll Middle School was another. And so we were able to do the carpet in that corridor after finishing out the HVAC in that second floor. They'll do the first floor next summer. You really can't get more than a floor in at one time because of the workload involved. New toilet partitions in the bathrooms as well. Of course, you can always track our progress at the building plan website. I know that's a lot of projects. You'll notice probably in the next few months, things will start dying down a little bit as we revamp and start planning our next round of projects. Summer's always the busiest time, but we'll keep you posted on those updates, and you can always check out the website as well. Any questions?
With Centerville, had this been a normal year, Obviously, we'd be a little bit behind. I assume any delays we've seen with that were COVID-related, is that correct?
Really, the only places we've experienced any real delay was at Centerville related, and that was, we lost a few days to COVID, but the wood elements that you see in that I pointed out earlier at Centerville that were missing, that factory got behind to COVID. So we've had a few material delays, but more generally speaking, we've been pretty fortunate that our projects have all, not had any major issues.
Gotcha.
We're going to go, thank you, Mr. Salters, that was great, and thank your staff, that's a lot of work. It's kind of funny what makes your heart pitter-patter. I love a good closet. I love a good storage shed, so I know exactly where those principals and teachers are coming from. We're now going to go to 10.3, which is Stronger Together Back to School Updates, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Little to introduce our next speakers.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So, as you know, we're trying to continue. Of course, we've already kind of had a Stronger Together update tonight when we talked about safety and some of the things that we're working on. But there are really three things I wanted to touch on tonight. One, perhaps more in depth than the other two. We've already had a online learning academy update a couple of weeks ago, but I wanted to revisit just kind of, here we are just on the eve and what we're looking at. And then a transportation update, which ought to be quick as well. But child care is really one of the critical elements. And I would like to thank Ms. Bizard for being here today and for her work in terms of how we are trying to address this issue with both our community as well as with our staff. So, Ms. Jessica, if you would give us an update a little bit, please.
Okay. Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Little, I'm excited to be with you tonight to talk to you about childcare partnerships that the childcare working team has developed over the past few weeks. We've been hard at work thinking about what this means for families in Lexington 1. First, we're going to start with partnerships with outside agencies. So we've been working with childcare centers across Lexington County. We received these centers through a survey that was sent to principals for facilities that service their schools through after school and then have a large presence in their building, and then also through Department of Social Services provided us with a list of all centers in Lexington County. So we were able to hold a welcome meeting for them to discuss their ability to serve students on e-learning days. We held that via Zoom, and Dr. Little was able to join us for that meeting. We had over 30 child care providers join us, and then we followed up with a survey to gather information from their center on what offerings they were able to offer during this time period, specifically during the hybrid model that our district is offering. And one of the things they were most excited about in the Zoom, we talked to them about our plans for support sessions for them and their workers, and how we could help them support children with e-learning, because many of them are offering that as a service during the hybrid model. So, for example, if they're an AA student on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, how they are supporting kids with their e-learning. So we actually kicked off those sessions this week. We hosted a session on Monday around the learning platform for grades 6 through 12 Schoology. We had about 10 centers join. It was recorded and will also be sent to all of the centers that are on our list because we know that daycares are busy caring for children during the day. We do offer the sessions at 1, as that is the time when they have, they're least encumbered with the youngest children, as that is their nap time. We have another session planned for tomorrow for Google Classroom. And then next week, we have 2 sessions planned. One is for how to support preschool students with distance learning. And then the other session is how to support students using the Seesaw app for their e-learning tools. So they are very excited about those sessions, and we're really excited to offer them. Howard Bissell was able to offer some support for those sessions with the digital learning coaches. They've been able to lead those and show the daycares what it looks like on a student side and how to navigate those systems. And so that's been really exciting work that we've been able to take part in. All right, so another piece of our partnership with outside agencies is the team worked hard to create a child care resource webpage, which is here highlighted in yellow. So this is a result of the survey responses that those daycare centers sent to us, and they've also been adding more centers as they have sent us information because they've seen the site and they want to know more about it. So we've added that information as we've gotten those. On the site, you'll find information about centers within our attendance area that have provided that information, and then how to contact those and what services they're able to provide. Also, a piece of the child care resource are that vouchers can be obtained for certain centers. And the website, well, we're going to flip ahead. This scchildcare.org website is where families can go to find out more information about how to apply for vouchers.
Ms. Bozart, do we know how they're funding those vouchers, where that money's coming from? Is it coming from the CARES Act, or is it just general
Vouchers,
child care money that's generally out there for child care?
that's right. So these are vouchers that are have always been there. They are provided for ABC quality approved programs, and it's always been a service. However, there are grants that child care centers can receive to assist families to offset the cost of child care, but that's only one allowable expense of those grants. Another is to help with cleaning and then other upgrades to their facilities. So if they're electing to use it in that way, they can provide assistance in that way. Another partnership with outside agencies that we've worked really hard with are churches. We've worked with them to determine if they're offering anything in the way of daycare for families, and then also if they're able to support us with volunteers and or space. So we've reached out to numerous churches around the area and are continuing to do so, and we're kind of going back and forth with them about what they're able to offer. Another partnership that is really exciting. So the South Carolina Department of Social Services, specifically the Early Care and Education Division, has recently issued, let's say 2 weeks ago, a certificate of temporary operation during the COVID-19 outbreak for facilities that aren't currently DSS certified. So facilities that operate beyond 4 hours have to be DSS certified. Well, lots of after-school programs fit within that less than 4 hours, so they're not DSS certified. So a lot of the facilities we talked to said, we want to offer the full day care on students' e-learning days, but we can't because we're not DSS certified. So we were able to reach out to DSS and share that information with them. They responded that lots of school districts were reaching out to them, and so their response was this certificate of temporary operation. So one example that I know of a facility that is reached out to begin obtaining this certificate is Ezekiel Ministries, which services several of our elementary schools with a needs-based after-school program. And they recently applied for the certificate, and they're waiting to hear back on approval. And as soon as they have approval, then they can operate full-day care for those e-learning days for students when they're not in face-to-face instruction. So that's really exciting. And also this scchildcare.org site has a place where families can search by their address to see what available centers are near them and what space they have available. Another piece that the Child Care Working Team has been working to figure out is how to support district employees with childcare. So we know that this is a burden for our employees and our teachers. They are not going to be able to teach the students if they do not have care for their own children. So we have a plan to support district employees with childcare on their e-learning days. This childcare is provided for Lexington School District 1 students who attend our district in grades 4K through grade 8. And it is only during school hours and is provided at the child's home school. And the space, kind of speaking to Dr. Guyton's point earlier, the space in which this is being offered is in spaces where social distancing can be observed. We have looked at the numbers that Mr. Salters and his team provided to make sure we were able to offer that.
Are we using CARES Act money for that?
No, this is not a cost to the district. So we are looking at support staff that, for example, let's say you have a virtual kindergarten teacher, so they also have an assistant, so that's one person that's helping to support the care, and then other support staff around the school. So this is not a cost to the district.
Do you know kind of about what average at a school, how many children you think you'll be servicing?
Yeah, it varies, anywhere from 40 to, let's say, 70, and that's just an average. But remember, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that number is essentially half because of the hybrid. So half of the children would be face-to-face, and then half of the children, would be in the child care. Also, it's not every employee is taking advantage of the care. Some have other arrangements, so that has affected the numbers as well.
And when we go 5 days face-to-face, this will just fade away, correct?
Yes, this is temporary. This is only during the hybrid model because the hybrid model affects, our employees. So this is temporary, which hence why it's only during school hours. Okay? All right. So that is the information I have for you from the Child Care Working Team. I appreciate your time, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
I'm just curious, so the community child care piece for working families, do you have a sense of what the cost is like per day? Because I just wonder if there are families that maybe would fall below the opportunity to take advantage of a DSS service or one of the other, opportunities there, but for whom it's going to be a hardship for their family budget to provide 2 days a week childcare for 3 children. Do we have an idea of where that falls, and are there any options? Because the grants you mentioned are for the child care centers, not for the families.
Yeah, the child care centers are able to apply for those, and then they in turn provide that to offset child care costs for families. Yeah, and so the cost of child care really varies per center and per day. And so, that can be anywhere from, $20 a day upwards, to 35-ish. But again, that's a range, and then also some facilities, once you get beyond a certain number of days, it's full week care regardless.
Right.
Regardless. Mm-hmm.
And this might be a question for Dr. Talley. I've been approached by 2 sister districts in the Midlands. They're very interested in this model, and who would be the best person if someone is interested in seeing this model and understanding it, who would be the best person for them to contact?
That would be Jessica.
Okay. She's giving your name out, Jessica.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
I'll be happy to answer their questions.
She's done a great job with her working group. I'm so proud of her and her leadership. Really done a great job.
Well, and this wasn't even on my radar. And again, so I would like to say thank you, and I'm sure it was in response to both our community and teachers expressing concerns. And so again, I think we as a district took those concerns seriously, and then we worked through a communication strategy. Because again, in times of fast change, none of us know what the future holds. So the only way we survive it is collectively together through strong communication. So, and we want these child development centers to do well and to be a vital part of our education system.
Absolutely.
Because they're very good partners, and we appreciate them at Lexington One.
Absolutely. And I'll add that our support that we're providing, this is just the start of that support. So this is going to go beyond the COVID-19, outbreak. This is just kind of gave us a jump start in that partnership.
I'm sorry, I have one more question.
Okay.
I think it's just one more. Kind of, and I don't mean to keep dwelling on the what if this doesn't go as well as we are praying that it goes. But have you had the conversations with these partners about if we have quarantines in a school? I mean, are we going to provide childcare for, do we have the long-range plan for this as well as the 4-week temporary plan for this?
So are you talking about like community childcare and daycare centers?
Yes.
Yeah, we're still working through exactly what that looks like, but that's part of the working
Okay,
group.
great.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Buzzhart. That was great. Okay, Dr. Little?
All right, thank you very much. Howard, you want to just give us a quick update on the Lexington One Online Learning Academy?
Thank you, Dr. Little, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm excited to provide an update for you this evening on Lexington One Online Learning Academy. I shared a high-level overview with you a couple of weeks ago, and just really proud of the work that our district has done. It really has been a district-wide team effort up to this point, and we still have plenty of work to go. But tonight I'd like to share some numbers with you and some sample schedules and some information that was shared with teachers over this past week or so, really bringing everyone into the fold and starting to conceptualize what this is going to look like in action here when we come back here in a couple weeks. Our current student enrollment numbers are represented on this slide. There is a bit of a difference between what you see on this slide and our total number of students in that C track. These are students that are enrolled in courses right now. And so our total number is above 7,000, 7,219 students that have selected into the online learning option. And so we have about 200 or so students to schedule tomorrow morning, and that number is changing every day. And so that's been a pretty regular occurrence. There's been a lot of fluctuation there, and so we're excited to get to a point to where we can start to button up that master schedule.
Sorry.
But it looks like it's about 500 students per grade, if I do my math right. The middle school may be a little bit richer than that, but does that ring true?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
It looks like it's about 500 students per grade are opting the virtual. So elementary 6 years, right? Middle's 3 and high school's 4. So around.
Yes, sir. And I'll have that breakdown for you
Oh, you will.
by grade level. Yes, sir, I understand. And so we're looking at about 27% of all district students at this point. So I'll give you a breakdown here by school and grade level. What you'll see that we've got to break up the elementary schools over a couple of slides here because there's a lot of data there to dig into. But you can see that roughly about 26% of elementary school students have selected the online option. And here's the remaining elementary schools there. And that's bringing our total enrollment right now, students enrolled into sections inside of our elementary schools to a little over 3,000 students. And then there's a portion that have not yet been enrolled in those sections, and that's work that we'll continue to do over the next week. Talk a little bit about what the elementary school schedule looks like. I've had some really good conversations with elementary teachers and administrators over this past week about what some instructional consistencies will look like and what the elementary school schedule will look like for students. Remember, I shared with you a couple of weeks ago that our goal is to create an experience inside of our online program that's going to very closely mirror what's happening face-to-face as far as instructional expectations go and as far as the student learning progressions go, with an anticipation that many of those students, not all of them, will be able to transfer back at some point when it's safe to do so. And so you can see there's a good bit of structure here in the elementary school schedule. They're still getting exposure to all the areas that you would expect them to get exposure to throughout the course of a day with math and ELA, reading and writing, science and social studies, and then some related arts work as well. You can see that they're starting that day with a morning meeting with their teacher. They're checking in, they're making sure that the kids are okay, they're all there, touching base with them, building relationships, and checking on their social emotional well-being. What's important to note here is that this resembles a day-long schedule for a student. This is not going to be an entire day in front of a device for a student. The teachers are working through professional learning and planning on how to structure their weekly schedules so that they can provide those schedules up front the week before to parents to help them plan that out. But you're gonna have an alternating model here throughout the day, where at some points during the day, students will be in synchronous communication with their teachers in a mini lesson, or maybe even in a smaller group receiving some support. And in other times, teachers are going to release those students to do some things independently and not necessarily in front of a computer screen working with digital materials. And so there are intentional breaks built in throughout the day to give students a little bit of a reprieve from learning, just like they might have in a face-to-face schedule. But the work that'll be done by teachers will be very intentional to create learning experiences and variety of learning experiences for students that'll keep them engaged, but won't burn them out. And I think that's an important consideration when we're talking about an elementary school schedule. We'll move on and look at middle school enrollment. Total middle school enrollment right now, we're looking at close to about 1,900 students, which was reflected in that additional that initial slide. Again, we'll have additional students rolling in to that online option that we'll need to place into sections. But you can kind of get a feel for the distribution here. The White Knoll attendance area or feeder pattern continues to have some of the highest enrollment there with Carolina Springs Middle School and White Knoll Middle School. And seeing that there are some varying trends by grade level across each of those schools.
Mr. Bissell, have the parents indicated why? It's just interesting, the differences. Do we know any of the reasons?
No, man, we haven't collected data from parents on why they've opted in. I mean, I think there's a lot of folks right now that are just looking for an alternative option given the environment.
Mr. Bissell, I have a question as well. This is Jada. 2 slides back, you had math, immersion enrichment,
Right there?
science. Okay, I know that our teachers are going places they've never been before, teaching subjects they may have never taught before. So if we have a teacher that's not an immersion teacher, but has immersion students, is that what's in this 15-minute, this 1 o'clock to 1:15? Like, how will immersion students be handled if they're placed in a classroom such as that?
Sure, that's a good question. And so those will be students that are enrolled in the online experience at a school where there is an immersion experience available. So this is a language enrichment, a language extension experience for those students, and it's going to be taught and facilitated by teachers that typically do that at that school in a regular setting. There are staff on hand at those elementary schools that support the immersion teachers, and so in this model here, those folks will focus exclusively on those students that are working that are enrolled in classes that typically would have a full immersion experience. Does that make sense?
Yes, so let's say usually it's math and science that's done in the other language.
Right.
What if they have a teacher that doesn't teach immersion on a regular basis?
Yeah, so it's not going to be the same immersion experience that you would have if you were in the face-to-face immersion program. It's going to be an alternative language enhancement experience for those students during the time that they're in this online model.
So when you say alternative language enhancement,
Yeah, well,
Can you elaborate?
so it's not going to be, they won't receive their instruction in that immersion language in math like they would if they were face-to-face. it's going to be an experience or a program that they can participate in that's going to keep them exposed to that language and keep building their skills in that language. They're not receiving their instruction 100% in math within that language. Maybe that explains it a little more clearly.
Yes, so what kind of program would that be?
I think what Dr. Spees has lined up are digital programs that help them to increase their fluency in that language. I think you can probably the most relatable one would be something like Rosetta Stone and those types of language enhancement programs and software that she has lined up. I think there may be some things that may be already in place at the school that they've used, and they're able to transfer that to an online environment.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So talking about the middle school schedule, so this is going to be a similar setup to the K-5 schedule. Obviously, middle school is a different animal all in, together, but we're excited that we're going to be able to provide some exploratory classes for students as well as some accelerated options if that's what they're enrolled in, along with their core subjects. We'll also be able to provide a connection with their teachers through an advocacy period, and this is almost identical to what you're seeing to a face-to-face schedule for middle school students. So again, if we're able to transition back fully to a face-to-face model, we'll have these students in a place where they can make a simple transition there and really mitigate any issues coming from a completely different online environment to what they'd be expected to do and pick up with in a face-to-face environment. And looking at high school enrollment, currently high school enrollment numbers a little north of 2,000. Again, I think that'll be a little bit higher after we actually get these kids placed into sections here over the next few days. The data speak for itself there. You see that trend continuing in the White Knoll High School attendance area flowing from Carolina Springs Middle and White Knoll Middle School into the larger numbers you see at White Knoll High School there. Varying grade levels across those schools. Not really a significant trend there by grade level. And then, as I shared before, just because of the nature of high school, it's going to be a more asynchronous experience, meaning that there's not going to be necessarily a first period, second period, third period, or first block, second block, third block for high school, just because of the ability of high school students to be a little more self-directed. You can get a little bit more out of that experience if you provide more flexibility in that schedule. Now, that's not to say that there won't be any accountability for students to interact with their classmates or with their teacher over the course of a week. It's just not going to follow a traditional bell schedule. So you can see a sample student daily schedule here. Might have a student enrolled in 4 different courses, and they may have a couple of different face-to-face interactions set up for that particular day. They may be on their own in some of those courses to complete some assignments or get to a particular checkpoint that in the online course that they're working in that's been established by their teacher. But we really want to try to provide an engaging experience for students. And as I alluded to before in previous presentation, we don't want that high school experience to be a student in an online course progressing by themselves, lesson by lesson by lesson by lesson. We want to work with our teachers to create experiences that are going to engage them in the content and engage them in collaborative opportunities with each other as they work through that online content. And at that age, really mirror the type of expectations that they would have put upon them if they were to participate in an online learning class or online learning opportunity, maybe in the workforce through some type of training program, or even if they were taking part in an online course in post-secondary education.
Will the high school schedule involve any social emotional learning or crew or advocacy time during the?
Yes, ma'am. That's a great question. It's not reflected in this schedule here, but that's a critical piece for us to maintain contact and identity back to the student's home school. And so we're working within the schedule that's already created for students so that they can maintain that connection back to those homeschool teachers there and really just the culture of the school through those advocacy experiences. Okay, that's my update. I'd be happy to take any questions.
I have a question. This is Jada. So in September, if we switch from hybrid to face-to-face, can virtual students switch back to face-to-face, or do they have to stay in Lula until the end of the first semester?
We are asking for a commitment through the end of the first semester. Reason being the complexity of scheduling and the impact on FTE and scheduling within the school's master schedule. We're actually scheduling right now for semester one, where typically you would build a master schedule for the entire year. We'll need to almost immediately start the master schedule building process again for semester two, so that we have all of that in place and we can be agile and flexible based on what our conditions are.
Okay, I know I got that question a couple of times. Will attendance be taken all 5 days, including Fridays?
Yes, ma'am. So we are working through direction and guidance that's been provided just recently by the State Department of Education on what attendance is and what it can look like. And so the answer is yes, attendance will need to be taken, and it will be taken. It will be tied to a student's participation in accordance with the teacher's written directions for their expectations. And that applies at each grade level. The process looks a little different at each grade level because the schedules look different at each grade level. But there will be accountability for attendance in place. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
What % of our special needs students have chosen virtual? Do we know?
The actual percentage I can get for you, I don't know off the top of my head.
I mean, is it significant, or do you?
A significant portion of the 27 overall percent, ma'am, I don't know.
You don't know?
Yeah.
Can you get that for us? I'd be real curious.
I'd be happy
as
to.
That number, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
What kind of feedback have you gotten from teachers? Obviously, I can't imagine having to do this type of pivot as a teacher to go, just looking at that elementary school day and just thinking about engaging with an elementary student in a virtual platform and to still maintain the same level of excellence that they always have, that's got to be, completely daunting. What kind of feedback have you gotten?
I think the teachers that are going to be working in this modality are excited for the challenge, to be completely honest with you. I've had some amazing conversations with teachers lately, and I think they recognize that they've been called to lead. And what is really a really interesting time. The best interest of their students, I think, are really more at the forefront of their thoughts, and maybe less about the difficulty in their own transition. I think they're just thirsty to learn and adapt so that they can provide a high-quality experience for their kids.
When you pull this off, and I say when, not if.
Thank you.
When you pull this off, you will have created 2 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 1 high school, and we didn't have to build a building. And so that presents a very interesting option in the future. Because we know that students go through certain seasons of their life, be it anxiety, be it even just personality, learning style, whatever it may be, where a virtual option is a very good option for them. And too often we think of schools as just being bricks and mortar and not, something that we're building around an individual student. And so this experience, when you pull it off, this will be eye-opening, in my opinion, as ways we approach the future and we look at growth for Lexington School District 1 and what that looks like. This can have some serious legs to it, I think.
And I'll expand on that. Most of us in the professional world are living in a hybrid learning environment, right? And so I think getting our teachers as well as our students used to some level of hybrid learning environment so that we can meet students exactly where they are and provide them instruction exactly what they need will prepare us better for leaders tomorrow. So, yeah.
Well, I'm offering a board member guinea pig because my son is doing the online academy, my 10th grader, and not for concerns about health necessarily, but just because he was extremely successful in the spring with being able to do his schoolwork at home without the distractions of school. He said on a number of occasions, "Mom, I love this. When I'm done, I'm done." And so we're pretty excited to see, what this opens up for him as far as greater academic success, because I think that this is something that I think this landscape, it may be different once we're through the pandemic, but I don't think that this online school world is going to go away. I think parts of this are going to stick around. And I think that's a good thing. I think that our physicians are right that this is the way our 21st century kids are going to live, is a foot in the in physical and a foot in virtual. And so I'm pretty excited about this option and watching it grow and seeing how it benefits my own kids. So.
Yeah, Ms. Mayor, I feel like there are a lot of benefits for students in their academic success and to provide some flexibility there. And perhaps just as important, an opportunity for them to have the conditions to grow with, in life and career skills as well. These environments are going to teach them how to persevere, how to be self-directed, how to manage themselves. And, it'll be an environment where they'll have some room to grow and to fail and to learn from that. But I think we could all probably point back to experiences where we've done the same thing. And so giving them this opportunity before they leave the K-12 system and Lexington one, I think is a great benefit to our students.
I agree.
I have one more question. It's Jada. I know some students aren't getting their devices until October. How are we handling those students?
Our IT department has done an amazing job and being agile and working through a current inventory and what we have access to them, so that students that are enrolled in our online learning academy will have devices delivered to them, or rather, sorry, not delivered to them, but distributed to them next week before the actual calendar year starts. And so those kids can't go to school if they don't have a device. So they're crunching that data and pulling those things together, and we're working with schools for a distribution plan here within the next week.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bissell. Great work, lots of things taking place and building that on the fly. Just a wonderful example of what's taking place in Lexington 1 and how we're addressing the needs of our students, our families, and our community. So thank you very much. Wonderful work. Mr. Caldwell, if you'd like to just give us a brief transportation update.
Yes, sir. As soon as I get the little magic clicker. You'll recall, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Little, a couple of weeks ago at the last board meeting, I gave an update on several topics, being transportation. Not a lot has changed here, but I wanted to give you just a kind of where we are today. Our ridership percentages, you'll recall that a survey was sent out and parents chose virtual or face-to-face, and they were also asked about their transportation needs. At that time, there was roughly 3,000, maybe 3,100 parents who had not been contacted. Most of those parents, if not all of them, have been contacted by now. The percentages that we're showing currently for requests for AM and PM transportation are actually lower than they were a few weeks ago. So that is a positive trend, but instead of me basking in the comfort of the trend going the right way, I'll tend to wring my hands and worry, are we missing something? So I am in contact with transportation daily. I'm sure Mr. Kurtz is probably watching and is hoping that the day comes very soon that I only contact him once or twice a day versus 6 or 8 times a day. I've also reached out to the secondary and elementary directors to have them contact the schools to be sure that that information post-survey is making its way to transportation so we can develop these routes. The good news is at those percentages, and even if they're higher, and I'm sure they may get a little higher before the end of the summer, for the first 4 weeks, those numbers will be cut in half. So I think for the first 4 weeks, we're in great shape as far as the ridership goes. We're not anticipating a lot of double routes and that sort of things. Now, when October comes and we are still under the 67% restraint as far as capacity, that will provide some more opportunities. But right now, we are literally building routes, or the transportation department is building routes based on ridership, not based on who is eligible to ride, but actually who has said they're going to ride, because we will create rosters each day and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Some of the safety procedures that we have in place, again, we've talked about this before. All students and adults will be masked while on the bus. We do know that the grades 2 through 12 will be masked in school. But all the kids will be masked while on the bus. So those lanyards that Mr. Salters showed earlier may come in be a great assistance with the younger children who are asked to wear a mask on the bus but not have to wear it in the classroom. Again, we have a limited capacity of our buses of about 67%, which is basically 2 to a seat. We're also attempting and if at all possible, to keep the seat directly behind the driver and across from the driver empty if at all possible, just to increase that space between the students and the driver. And again, as I said, the drivers will be taking a roster with seating each day. That's not a roster of who could be riding, that's actually who is on that bus and where they sat. So if there is a positive case, we would need to contact trace that, and we'll know exactly who sat where on what day. Cleaning protocols, we have 10 electrostatic sprayers, and we're expecting maybe 5 or 6 more from the state at some point this year. Just for your information, one sprayer can clean about 30 buses. It's a 2.5-gallon backpack. And Mr. Kurtz tells me it takes between 5 and 8 minutes to clean each bus. So we won't be able to clean each bus after after the elementary goes and picks up middle or high, but at the end of the morning routes and at the end of the PM routes, those will be sprayed down. And then we'll also try to wipe down the contact, the high contact surfaces as much as possible in between the routes. So this last slide is regarding equipment. It's really not COVID related, but I thought it might be a good opportunity since I had the floor just to remind you of a few things. We have received those 22 propane buses from the VW Volkswagen settlement. Again, those are replacement buses. Those aren't additional to our fleet. They're replacement buses. And what that's allowed us to do is get rid of all the 1992 and 95 models. We do have a few 88s. We actually have 88s that are in better shape than the 92 and the 95s. The 95 models were the ones that were most susceptible to what the state calls the thermal incidents, when the buses would have those fire issues. So we have none of those.
Thermal event.
Yeah, thank you. I could not come up with a term. Thank you. Thermal events. That's exactly right. We have received 5 additional buses. Now, they're not brand new, but they are newer buses from the State Department, and we expect hopefully to receive 6 more at some point this year. Just as a reminder, we actually received those 11 last spring, and then Kershaw County suffered the loss of their fleet with the tornado, so all those buses went to them. So we've recouped 5 of those and hope to receive 6 more at some point this year. And just for your information, the average age of our state fleet is now 7 years old, which is that's a pretty good age ratio.
Great. Mr. Caldwell, what are the fuel sources for the 11 buses, the 5 that we just got and the 6 we're getting ready to get? What kind of fuel? Are they
they're
going to be
diesel.
propane or?
No, they're diesel, but they're not brand new buses. They're just new to Lexington One's fleet.
Okay.
They were reallocated throughout the state, from the state.
Will students be using hand sanitizer as they get on and off the bus?
We are working through that because the state has a requirement, just like Mr. Salters has talked about. I'm sorry, I'm looking around this petition. He's talked about how the fire marshal doesn't allow, a quantity of hand sanitizer in the buildings. Well, there's regulations about hand sanitizer on the bus as well. So we're working through being able to give them, we're going to allow them to have their own, and the drivers will have their own, and we're working through a process to try to give them as Dr. Little says, a scrub in as they come on the bus. And again, they will be masked. That is it, kind of down and dirty. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
This is Jada. I had a question. Did I catch you saying that the hand sanitizer will be supplied for the bus drivers? Is that what you said?
We are allowing the bus drivers to have hand sanitizer. I'm not sure about how the supply of that works. I'd have to get with Mr. Salters in operation, but we will allow the drivers to have hand sanitizer. But as far as having a large quantity on the bus to sanitize all the students' hands, we're working through that with respect to what the state says we're allowed to do, having that quantity of hand sanitizer on the bus.
Right. Okay. So since the kids will be on the bus before they reach the school, what if they go to get on the bus and decide they're not wearing a mask? What are the consequences for that?
Well, what we don't want to do is create what I've called a cottage industry of mask disciplines. Certainly, if a student is non-compliant on the bus, we're not going to not take the student to school. We do have a process in place that a student not wearing a mask could eventually be asked to take, a virtual learning experience. But that's after much training, much grace, talking to parents, having conferences, doing all those sorts of things. Having a student removed from the regular setting to a virtual setting would be a last resort type situation. There could be consequences for not complying, just like any other policy or rule that you have. But again, we're not looking to create a discipline record that's heavy with mask offenses. We'd rather educate and conference with the parents and the students to get them to comply, but for their safety and for the safeties of others. I know it's very limited data, and it's only 2 days worth, but I've not heard one issue these last 2 days. And again, I realize it's only 2 days and very limited number of students. I think we have probably, I hope we're worrying more about that than what's actually going to come to actuality, because I think the students and parents understand the necessity to mask up. So we'll work with those one-off situations as they arise.
Okay, one last thing. Will you go over again those driver vacancies and how many we have training?
As of last Friday, we had, I think it was 11 driver vacancies, and we have several drivers who were on FMLA. And again, they will be rolling back on whenever their FMLA is up. I think we've hired 2 or 3, and we have 7 that are in some point of training. Some are ready for the permits to get behind the wheel. Some have just started. So that is a process that won't be finished in 2 weeks, but we do have, relatively low number of vacancies now, and we do have some folks in the pipeline, so I certainly hope that they will complete their training and get qualified to drive for us.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
In your first slide, you had like 13% of students were riding in the AM.
AM, that's right. That's
Now,
about 30, it's about 3,600 in the morning and about 5,700 in the
So is that
afternoon.
13% of the face-to-face students of our 75%, or is that 13% of our student
13% of all
population?
students, that's right.
Of all students, of 27,000 students?
That's correct.
Okay, how does that compare to, say, last year?
We normally have about a 60% or so ridership.
Really?
Yeah. So it's,
We have some areas that are almost 100%, don't we?
there's lots, and Mr. Kurtz actually tells me that it's about 67%. That just for some reason sounds a little too high to me. I think the way the state calculates it, it's kind of a little skewed, but it's well over 50%. I know that. It's probably closer to, as he said, 60% or so. So we are down considerably. And now every seat counts. Not that they didn't before, but if you had 74 on a bus, you might can squeeze one more on to make it 75. Now, if the capacity of a bus is 24, I'm making that number up, and we have 24 kids on the bus, there is no squeezing one on there because we are bound by those, by the regulations from the State Department. So I'm certainly hoping that the numbers bear out that the buses are relatively empty during this AB period. Because in the end of September, if everything works out as we plan, we're going to put them all together. And the transportation has developed or is developing the routes as if that were happening now, because otherwise they would develop an A route, they would develop a B route, and then in 4 weeks have to develop an A and B route. So they're developing the routes with the thought that all students will be on the bus in about a month.
So after all the numbers shake out, what kind of consideration do we have to give for student drop-off in the morning by the parent? I mean, do we expect that to be, is 2,000 feet enough? Whatever our stacking capability is it enough?
It's never enough.
No, no. So, and here, in full transparency, here's what I've one of the many things that I wring my hands over. Lots of parents have chosen to take their kids to school, and from a transportation perspective, I'm not going to argue with that. What I fear is our numbers stay low. The parents are picking up, and it's not so much the drop-off, I think, as much as it is the pickup. And I think they're going to see these buses rolling out that are not that don't look like they're full, although they actually may be. And they've been sitting in the line for quite some time, and they may say, you know what, I think I'm going to go to transportation and let them take my student to and from school. They certainly have that right and that opportunity, but what happens is if the bus that they ride is already full to the 67% capacity, then we're looking at the possibility of having to shift to other buses just to accommodate one student. Now, certainly we will do everything in our power to make that happen, but it won't be just as easy as say, hey, let's add Jeff to the route starting tomorrow, because if that puts that bus over the limit, then we may have to shift things around to other buses to make that happen. So there's lots of pieces and parts when you get down in the minutia.
So you're saying it could be 13% on day one, but 30% on day two? I mean, it truly is a moving target.
That's right.
Interesting.
I'm just astounded at the number of what-if scenarios y'all have had to take into consideration.
That it? Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, not for you, Mr. Caldwell, but before we move on to new business. Mr. Salters, I saw one of those pictures, we had the water filling station available, but not the water fountain. Have the ice makers, are they going to be in use?
Ice makers in kitchens?
Right, for staff, not students.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That was the question I had. For Mr. Stacy. Some IAs have heard that covering classes as a sub is voluntary. Is this true? And if so, is there a way to get clarification on who has to cover and how that decision is made?
So we asked the principals at each school to identify who in their schools could be on that auxiliary list. You saw with the model about the auxiliary staff. So we asked the principals to put those people that they could put on that auxiliary staff that they could depend on to cover classes if we didn't have a sub for a particular teacher. And so I've had a couple of, well, more than a couple, we've had several calls in our office about, I can't be on the auxiliary staff list because of, A, B, or C. And so what I've told them is they need to go back to their administrator and talk to them first. And then if they have some kind of accommodation request, then they would submit that to Meredith Siebert, and we would work through that process. But, I've talked to principals, we're getting the auxiliary list staff now, so I don't know how many people will be on that, but people that are on the auxiliary list would be people like instructional assistants, people that don't have students in front of them at the moment, instructional coaches, interventionists, assistant principals, guidance counselors. Everybody, because what you got to think about is when the teachers are out, the first go-to is substitutes. And so then we get a substitute in the classroom. Then the second go-to is I couldn't get a substitute. Now I got to go down this auxiliary list. And so when he was talking about that model shift and looking at those decision points, if you've got 15 people on your auxiliary list and you're down to using 7 or 8 of those on a given day, think about that. You've already secured substitutes. Now you're 7 or 8 deep on that. That flags the staff attendance, which is one of those triggers that asks for an investigation. And so we're going to have to start looking at that really, really quick. So the auxiliary list should just be something that's not used every single day and every person on there. We can't have just one person, like you're number one on my auxiliary list, so every day you're going to be subbing. They've got to use some parameters to make that happen. And then beyond that, we've asked central services, each of the chiefs, to identify people in their offices that could be on that auxiliary staff list so that if the school gets into a critical point, they can call us. Because our thinking is, even if we were considering a shift, it's not going to be like you're going to come to school on Monday. Oh, okay, Tuesday we're going to be virtual. We're going to have some time to do the investigation and plan for that. And so we just want to have some backup situations to cover. But to answer your question, it's really a conversation between that support staff person and that administrator, and then if they have a problem, they contact HR.
Okay, thank you so much. One other thing, can we get some kind of frequently asked questions for staff? I know I'm fielding questions all day long about COVID leave and how many days and FMLA and short-term disability. Or maybe I already have something like that put together. I don't know. I know I've asked you early on, but I don't know what's changed since then, so I hate to tell people something and not have the right answer, and I hate to call you 5 times a day.
Sure. I mean, if you just tell me the kinds of questions, the COVID leave is pretty much established, and I'm pretty confident that that's on the frequently asked question list that we have with the Stronger Together website. If there's something that's not addressed there, I'd be more than happy to put it on there and address it. But and honestly, the easiest way to deal with that, if a particular employee has any question about leave, and I've told all of us, because I even get in try to answer a question that's really not in my lane, because I don't deal with it on a regular basis, I can mess it up. So Jennifer Berry is the person that we contact. She walks them through that and can tell them what kind of leave is available and where they can be. And Meredith Siebert works hand in hand with her. So I'm scared to give too much information out to just an employee, because a lot of it is very individualized based on what their particular situation is. And so I just want to make sure that
Okay.
whatever we give them is the right thing.
Okay, that makes sense. Maybe that's why I have so many questions. Okay. And I don't know who would answer this one, but I know DHEC came out with some, I guess, frequently asked questions of their own. I guess, Dr. Little, this may be for you. And yeah, frequently asked questions from DHEC. So a lot of these don't agree with some of the things that we're doing. And I'm wondering kind of which one will we be following. So for instance, it says if a teacher or staff member is a close contact to a case but is asymptomatic, can he and she continue to work? And the answer is teachers and school staff are considered critical infrastructure employees, so they may continue to work if it is necessary to maintain school operations. But I know in the self-screening that employees have to sign when they come in, that's one of the questions that if they answer yes to, then they cannot report to work. But I know all along we're saying follow DHEC guidelines. So what are we doing in these cases?
We're doing what the self-screening is.
Okay, follow the health screen, okay.
Any other questions, board? Well, thank you. Thank y'all for answering that. I'm going to do something I don't think we've ever done. We're going to take a 3-minute break. And because we still have a good many things left, so we're going to walk away for 3 minutes and we'll be right back. So come back at 9:20. I can't really see the clock. Let's see, at 9:25 when we'll start back up, because that clock's a little bit. 9:26.